your first memory of music?
My first memory of music? Oof, that's a big question.
Wow. My first memory of music must be percussion, but I don't remember it necessarily.
Music being sung and also two children's records being played.
My mum singing me sort of lullabies as a kid. If I'm going all the way back, it's also probably my mum playing the piano. I remember her sort of playing the piano when I was a kid and playing the guitar. It was quite a musical household in the sense that if there was a party or they had friends around, somehow we'd always gather around the piano towards the end of the night and people would just be singing and playing, and it'd be quite a nice atmosphere.
My mother used to sing French children's songs to us. And there was this other song that they used to play for us on a record. I think came from Tom Thumb. But I just remember that melody still plays in my head. Still very present.
Right.
I had an older sister, so I used to listen to the stuff that she was listening to and sort of think, oh, this is cool, you know. Jungle, Madonna. It's like a medley of what you'd have an older sister listen to in the sort of early 90s.
I suppose it was when I was about 5 years old, and we were taken to hear performances of Handel's Messiah. There was a church that we went to, and there's a lot of music there. And there was someone that we knew who ran this choir. My mother used to sing in the choir. So we'd go along to the rehearsals and sit, have a book or something and listen. And thought the sound was magical, you know. Listening to Three Kings by Peter Cornelius.
No, I used to play drums all the time before the age of 5. And people used to come for my birthday parties and I'd be playing drums and they'd have to join in. That's just my earliest musical memory, for sure.
We had a teacher at primary school that used to take us to lunchtime concerts at Leeds Art Gallery. And it could be a solo pianist or it could be a string quartet or something. And we weren't very good at listening, to be honest.
Yeah, it was in that sense, it was for me quite cool to have these different sort of points of reference, you know, listening to Russian sort of folk music or Soviet songs or Eritrean tribal music or pop music from the 80s and 90s to sort of underground music that was happening at the time. It was quite a mixed listening pot.
Some of us were taken to meet the artist backstage and learning the art of appreciation and talking to an artist. I think that experience of having to sit and listen eventually became something that was appreciated, but a bit later on.
That's really interesting because, I mean, for a lot of people, their sort of earliest musical memory and experience doesn't necessarily come through a practical engagement with playing. But
I mean, I heard it, but I was playing from such an early age that I saw it as something you do. And then I listen to it, but I do it, I listen, and then I join. And so, as I said, with the poetry group, I sat in with them, but I was already playing, and then I sat in with them. So it's definitely a doing, an engagement.
When I did come to the point of creating music, it was never a point that I had issues with sort of being influenced by one thing. It almost was an a filtration of different things. Therefore, I never thought it was an issue to focus on one thing. It was always a spectrum of things. So when it was coming to me like that, it was already mixed in a sort of weird sort of way. So yeah, it was very natural to sort of mix things around from the get-go for me.
Both my parents had very different tastes, obviously, and very different cultural references. So I remember hearing Casals and Song of the Birds from an early age. My grandfather was a church organist in Cornwall, so he was a lover of Bach, so that was a big influence. He was an organist and also a pianist. So I grew up with Nigerian music, like my father liked King Sunny Ade. I didn't like it at the time. I mean, I didn't really like Nigerian music at that time when I was a kid. So there was classical music and then also reggae, because it was big in that period of the 70s. So I grew up with Bob Marley. The Harder They Come was the first vinyl record that I had in the collection. I remember playing to death, and then Exodus when that came out. Those two records were one that were on constant. I could put it on. Those were the first records I could put on the thing myself. So I would play those until they were waving up and down. Yeah, so those are probably the early musical memories. Casals, Bach, some of the 70s reggae, which were all the things, if you now think of what the things I was saying about as a composer, those were all the strands that kind of weave throughout my journey.
Dad's record collection was very eclectic, because you had poetry recited by Theodore Bickle with orchestral accompaniment, like psalms and texts from the Bible, because he was a great actor and he did Fiddler on the Roof and things. He could really bring some of this stuff to life, and the orchestration enhanced what was going on in the text. Then a couple of blues records, bluesy gospel things, and then there was classical music in there. So it was a mixture of things that we kind of were able to hear in the house. And then, as far as church music was concerned, it was choral, sometimes Handel and people like that. And you could hear gospel music from the Caribbean being performed.
Classical music was very, very present. Just because my parents were amateurs, and also music from Venezuela, traditional music from Venezuela, which was very present in Trinidad. And we have a form of it called parang, which happens every Christmas, where people go from house to house playing cuatros, guitars, harps, violins, clarinets, flutes, whatever, and various bits of and box bass, various bits of percussion, and they play these Christmas songs that are all sung in Spanish, and they're given food and drink in exchange. And that was a huge, huge part of our childhood, but also because my dad was one of 5 friends who shared an estate where they grew citrus, cocoa, and coffee. And that was in the center of Trinidad. So on weekends, all the families would go to the estate, and we would spend a Sunday in the estate house, which was a very, very basic house. It was inhabited by bats. But the village where it was mostly inhabited by Spanish-speaking villagers. And their Spanish was a sort of a type of patois, a type of Creole. But they all played this music, and they all spoke either Spanish, this broken Spanish, and English, of course.
My dad was very encouraging, but as my mum always liked to say, the musical sort of influence, the musicality came from her. They were very into sort of Bonnie M, ABBA, the Beatles, the sort of classic hits of the 70s, early 80s.
So that music was very, very present. And of course you always had calypso in your ear, constantly. Calypso, and every single year, new calypsos coming out. and everybody would be singing those calypsos. So you had those, and because calypso is really lyric based, it's about the words, it's about lyrics. So everybody would be repeating these lyrics over and over. And the sound of steel band, that was constantly in the air also.
Classical music, again, it was a mixture. It was always a mixture of things. And that's why a mixture of things is a happy medium for me now, I suppose.
My mother was very much into, well, she listened to classical music constantly. And also a lot of French classical composers. And because she worked at the French embassy, she had access to their library. They had a lending library of French music. And so we always had French music at home, music of Debussy and Ravel. And throughout my teens, that was the music that I really, I not only grew up with, but I deliberately, like, I would make cassette tapes of Ravel orchestral pieces or the piano concertos. I would go to sleep with that because I just wanted that sound constantly with me. That sound, I don't know, something about his orchestration just really, really resonated with me. So that was very present. That and Bach. And my dad was more sort of mambo, Perez Prado, big bands. He was a dancing man. He used to love dancing. So, and the whole sort of Venezuelan tradition of joropos, music with harps, cuatros, guitars. That Venezuelan, the South American harp, which is a diatonic harp. Yeah, those influences were very strong.
There was always influence of Eritrean music, so there were a lot of singers and musicians from the sort of era of the struggle between Eritrea and Ethiopia, who sang sort of revolutionary songs. Similar to my mum, she grew up in the Soviet Union, so there was a whole era of musicians from that age that I listened to as well. That's from the pop side of the Soviet Union, but at the same time there was a plethora of musicians, violinists. Russia's got a great music, a violin school that David Oistrakh, Igor Oistrakh, Leonid Kogan, Jascha Heifetz, who then obviously before then went to live and work in the US. Listening to all of that stuff as well was important for me. So it informed my own playing. They were figures that I looked up to as well when I was studying the violin. So
I suppose a common element in the music of my parents that I liked was rhythm. Bach's rhythm is just constantly present. In Ravel as well, it's very, very present, but in a different way. And he plays a lot also with polyrhythms. I loved all of the music by the Hungarian and Eastern European composers because it was, and Dvorak. Dvorak's Slavonic dances. When I heard that I remember listening to as a child. And I loved that music. It was just the rhythm of it, and it was so powerful, it was so strong, and it just really resonated with me. And it's just rhythm, it's just that whole thing of rhythm, I think.
And what about examples of aspects of your parents' musical taste that you disliked? Were there any?
Yes, I think I was less impressed by the music and, well, what I call sentimental sort of music, like, what was it, the BBC Symphony Orchestra doing pop music, or the sentimental songs of the 60s at the time, the kind of crooners, Andy Williams. I mean, I love Andy Williams now, but then I just thought, good God. One song that really used to drive me up the wall was Moon River, and they used to love it, but you'd hear that song all the time on the radio, and it's, God.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I didn't like King Sunny Ade at the time because my father loved that music.
Why?
And there was another artist called Egbezui Obe. I couldn't understand it wasn't a language thing. It was, and there was one that really got on my nerves, and it probably still does to a degree. But what it was the music was going, and there was this African percussion, you know, talking drums and all this stuff. And then this guy was singing "Away in a Manger" across it in a very odd way. Away in a manger, and all these drums. I was like, what is this music?
As you're going through your teenage years, you're kind of listening to the chart music and things like this. And sometimes there's disagreement about what is acceptable music and what isn't. I guess everybody has that kind of exchange.
But that was, yeah, it was. I think it was a Christmas special, obviously. But I was just like, what the hell is this? So I really didn't like that. And funnily enough, but when I heard people like Fela Kuti, it was different. Fela Kuti's music, very different energy. I think I could sense that King Sunny Ade and all those guys were kind of party musicians. And for me, music's always been, even as a kid, I think I was attracted to music that had more, I don't know what the word is, but more meaning. I could tell when the music was for a social function and when it was for a deeper consciousness thing. And I think from Fela you can hear that from the politics and the message. And I heard Fela's music a lot later. I didn't hear Fela's music there. I think it would have been interesting if I'd heard Fela's music in that period when I was a kid. That might have been different. But then you also have to understand I was in London in the 70s and this music was just seemed like it's from outer space. So it was, and the weird thing is I was playing drums. I could relate to all the rhythmical things, but culturally I didn't understand. Yeah, it's just that thing. You grow up with certain things you don't understand until a lot later, why things are a certain way, and you just know what you gravitate to. Kids are immediate. They know what they like, what they don't like. And I said, when I heard the kora, I was just connected with that, even though that wasn't my heritage directly. But the sounds, you know, the refinement of the music was very sophisticated and very subtle and deep, profound.
I mean, it was everything, wasn't it? It was reggae, it was this, it was that, you know, the other. And it wasn't church music, so maybe it's not a good thing, you know what I'm saying?
My older sister, she used to be my reference point for the sort of more edgy stuff, or, you know, the stuff that I wasn't supposed to listen to, or, you know, like Snoop Dogg's first album, or whether it was like Nirvana. She had quite a medley of stuff that she listened to, so it was nice to have all of these sort of things readily available.
Yeah, I'd say it definitely has had a positive impact. It's been, you know, part of the sort of the foundation stones from which I've built. It's that bath of sound that has sort of constantly enveloped me, and from which I've built, but also sort of moved on. And I think I realize now, you know, that I was attached to it for a very long time, but I've moved on to maybe, if I might be so bold, you know, a more mature sound, or a sound that's more individualized.
I wouldn't really talk about their influences musically. I think it's more to do with, because I grew up in an environment where there were so many options of things to listen to, it cultivated the idea that there isn't one right way of listening or to appreciating something. So in that sense, I'm very grateful for that sort of open-mindedness of approaching music.
I think it's the fact that they did appreciate music, and my mother spent time in choirs and things and taking the time to learn music. And I think I learnt how to rehearse things as she supervised practice in my early teens, because I wasn't very good at it. Because you can waste time just coming in and not being goal-centred with what you want to accomplish each time you sit down to do something. And so she was very good at reining it in by looking at sections of things, and if something wasn't quite right, maybe finding a way to perfect that.
For me, it was easy to go and listen to hip-hop and then go and listen to, a violin piece by Berio. In a way, that's why my music now, I sort of still draw from different points, and it becomes easy to mix and try and match things in your own musical language when you can listen to different types of things quite openly.